Morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're going to give it a few minutes and let people just make their way into the session. So we will just get started in just a few minutes. Thank you all so much for joining us. And for those of you who have already joined us, if y'all want to let us know who you are, just so we can kind of get a sense of who's on the call with us today, go ahead in the chat, just drop, what organization or what school system or state education agency you're representing. No pressure. Great, thank y'all. Glad to see so many friends from New York City Public Schools. I know you guys are embarking on this journey, so I'm glad to have you all here with us today and others. We're going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Just let a few more people join us. Okay, well, everyone has busy lives here joining us today, so we are going to get started. So thank you all so much for joining our September Professional Learning Power Hour this morning. Before we get started, just do a couple housekeeping things. One is, if you have questions during today's conversation, go ahead and put those in the Q&A. So we're going to pause. What we'll do is I'll kind of do some quick introductions, and then we are going to have a conversation with the ladies that you see here on your screen. So we'll be doing a little bit of Q&A back and forth with them to get to know their adoption stories. And then once we have that conversation, then we're going to take some questions from the audience. So just drop your questions that come to you as we're talking in the Q&A, and we will make sure that we get those answered. And then just keep yourselves on mute. But let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Annie Morrison. I am the co-founder of Rivet Education. And at Rivet, we believe that high quality instruction materials and professional learning are really the building blocks of strong instruction. So our vision and mission as an organization is to help both state education agencies and local school systems ensure that teachers have access to both of those things so that kids are getting the education that they not only deserve, but the education that they want to pursue their life goals. And a lot of our work is driven by our framework for high quality professional learning. And within our framework, we define the characteristics of professional learning. So regardless of the type of professional learning that you're doing or within what structure it's being delivered, these characteristics that you see here in the yellow bottom of our triangle should be present. So professional learning should be equity focused. It should be specific to educators' context, so their specific grade level or content area. It needs to be content focused and, again, aligned to the materials teachers are using in their classrooms. It needs to be interactive and collaborative, and it should address expectations and motivations behind teacher practice and lesson planning, and then also be data-driven. And then we define the types of curriculum-based professional learning. So there's really 4 types. And we're going to dig into that first type here today. The first is adoption. Then there's that initial launch of the materials. Then there's the ongoing support for teachers and skillfully using those materials. And then finally, there's that really critical systems design and leadership support that helps both school and district leaders really put the systems and policies and structures in place to maximize the benefits of their high quality materials. And then finally, at the top of the triangle here, there's different structures. I think all too often we think of professional learning happening in like that traditional workshop setting, but that real dynamic professional learning, and, you know, according to Rand, the professional learning that teachers both find the most effective and enjoy the most are those that's happening in collaborative planning time, or PLCs, and coaching. And then there's also consultation for school leaders. So this is a little bit of our framework and really the driver behind all of the work that we do here at Rivet. We also, for those of you that are new to us, we also are the author of the Professional Learning Partner Guide, which is a free list of vetted professional learning organizations that service those curricula that are green on EdReports. So in the way that EdReports reviews and rates curricula, we do that on the professional learning side. So professional learning organizations apply to be a certified provider in the PLPG. We have a review team of educators across the country that review those services. And if they are green-lighted, deemed like within best practice based on our scoring and evidence guide, they are featured in this tool. And so you can filter our partner list by the type of support you're needing, the specific curricula that you're using, or the state that you're in. And again, today is the first that we are really excited in this new series for our professional learning power hours now through February, where we are going to dig deep into the journey that schools and school systems take in implementing high quality instruction materials. And so here at Rivet, we've identified 5 stages that's really grounded in implementation science that you take in implementing curriculum. So the first being is like the exploration of materials, then that initial launch of those materials, the initial implementation, which usually happens within years 1 and 2, that consistent implementation after that, and then that final dream spot that we all hope to get to, that sustained, innovative part of the curriculum journey. So over the next several months, we are going to dig deep into each of those stages today, starting with adoption. So again, this is a quick look at those 5 stages that we're going to be digging in over the next several months. I'll just pause here and let everybody kind of take this slide in. But I think it's important just to emphasize that, like, I think all too often we think of like adopting a new curriculum as like a one-year thing. And that's not the case. It is really a marathon. It is the marathon of all marathons. And this work does happen over several years with a lot of sustained, consistent focus, attention, and most importantly, professional learning. Okay. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests that are here with us today. In our PL Power Hours, we always like to bring in guests to help us like bring a lot of what we talk about in theory here at Rivet to actually put it into practice and make it concrete for our audience. So today we are joined by Shanna Estep with EdReports, Jessica Slayton with Metro Nashville Public Schools, and Jenny Salvach with Rocky Mountain Prep. And so we are super excited to have them all joining us today to really share some light on the adoption stories that they have recently embarked on. So EdReports has been a partner, a professional learning partner to both of these school systems in their adoption journey. So I am going to turn it over to you guys. I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick and let everybody see you guys, and we will just dig into some of our questions. So I think the first question I have is really for Shanna, for you. I think that many people know that EdReports, again, I mentioned this earlier, is the arbiter of high quality instruction materials. You guys review materials, rate them, and post them and make them publicly available on your website. But I don't know that people know that you all actually provide technical assistance and support to school systems in actually going through that adoption process. And so I would like for you just to kind of just like start today by telling everyone a little bit about like how you all go about doing that work and how you came to partner with our 2 guests that we have here today.
Yeah, Annie, thanks so much for having me today. It's funny, when I came to EdReports a little over 6 years ago, Um, I came into some work that really hadn't been carved out yet. It was, we might have folks who don't know about EdReports, don't know about how we go about reviewing materials, et cetera. So really, I came on to kind of help the field know who EdReports is. It's funny because, now fast forward, lots of folks know who we are. But really, I came on at a time when I made a lot of conference rounds and really kind of was trying to help people just know who we were. And during that time, I realized that lots of people needed to know how to use the reports, right? So the reports are very dense. They have a lot of great information. I mean, detailed information. So folks who are at various levels of the system could tap into a report at any, level of the report, high level, color coding, all the way down to the very nitty gritty, coaches and teachers kind of looking at in unit X on page Y, you can see an example of this indicator. Folks just didn't know how to read the reports really and kind of use them. So my work started just with a very small subset of states and districts, just kind of helping people like think about what is the information that you could use from a report to make some great decisions about whether you're selecting new materials or implementing materials you've recently purchased, and now EdReports has come out saying, oops, they were yellow or red. What do you do with that information? And I'm from California. We're on a very strict every 7 years, the framework, well, supposed to be every 7 years. I'm sure lots of folks have heard the delay in our math framework, but so every 7 years, we got a new framework, you adopted new materials. And it was very much you wrote a check and it was the ta-da, I call it, it's the end of the process, right? And so what I realized is I would do a workshop on like a crash course on adopting materials, and people would say, I need more. Can you do a full day? Can you come and do 2 days? And then I would do 2 days, and districts were like, or even states, can you help us actually do this? 2 days is, I need more than 2 days, actually. Can you come and kind of, for lack of a better phrase, hold our hand through the process? And so we kind of built that up on my side of the work at EdReports. And now we have, lots of services that help districts and states and other local education agencies really think deeply about the information that's in the reports and what are all the systems pieces that need to be in alignment before you start an adoption. Or if you've just recently adopted materials and we didn't help you, how can we help you really circle back to some of those system pieces and get those in alignment before you go and launch and implement those materials?
Yeah.
And my
I think people also, I think people don't realize how much the adoption process itself is like real professional learning for everyone involved. That entire process of like setting a vision, digging in and like looking at the mathematical practices or the shifts or the 3 dimensions, whatever it may be, whatever subject area you're focusing on, and then comparing that to the materials themselves and like looking in those materials, looking at the assignments and tasks and everything, and like connecting that, like that's real intense and very meaningful professional learning that happens in that too. And so I think like it's no surprise that like people are wanting additional support to navigate that process. So yeah. Why don't you tell us like a little bit about like your partnerships with Metro Nashville and Rocky Mountain Prepped and how that got started?
Sure. And then I can, Jessica and Jenny can also speak to their stories, but with Metro Nashville, they had recently been through an ELA adoption. They had a lot of their system pieces were already in alignment and in preparation for a new adoption. Also, Tennessee is similar to California in that they have, they produce a list. In Tennessee, I believe, and you can speak to this, Jessica, I think you have to adopt off the list. California, we moved away from that a few years ago. But so we were excited when Jessica and her team came to us, knowing that we had a very short amount of time to help them get to what we call a winnowed list, right? Because we know that there are, lots of products out on the market, some that folks have never even remotely heard of. So I worked directly with Jessica, just kind of helping her through the process of adoption and all the things around, recruitment of a committee and what are the professional learning pieces that a committee would need to get them ready to have a state list and have a few materials that they would actually go and deeply investigate, because we recommend that committees in general don't try to take on, deeply investigating more than 2 or 3 products, because the investigation is really intensive, and we want it to be deep and meaningful, and you cannot do that when you're looking at 7 different programs. So that was the Nashville project. And with Rocky Mountain Prep, there were 2 charter networks that were merging, and their K-5 teachers all had, high quality instructional materials in place. Secondary was not the same. And we find that a lot at EdReports, where secondaries, they get their elementary schools kind of dialed in, and then secondary is kind of second or not even thought of until 3rd or 4th. And so we were working with Rocky Mountain to adopt both secondary, ELA, and mathematics. And with that project, we kind of helped soup to nuts, right? A to Z, from the very, very beginning of like helping them think about their instructional vision and what their hopes and dreams for kids were, and what they wanted to see as effective teaching and learning in the classroom, all the way to the very last day with their committee, where we worked around some consensus to make their decision, their final decision. So two different but very fun projects, and I'm excited that they've joined today to kind of talk about their experience.
Yeah, well, thank you for that quick intro. Jenny, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about, Shanna mentioned like the merger that happened, but beyond that, like what was kind of like, what prompted you all to want to make a change with your ELA materials? Like a lot of people look at different things when they are like come to that aha moment to be like, we need to be doing something different. What was that catalyst for you guys?
So there are a couple of different things, and I'll just introduce myself. My name is Jenny Salvach. I'm a senior director of academics at Rocky Mountain Prep in Denver. And as Shanna mentioned, I was originally with our secondary schools, and we just recently merged with a set of elementary schools. So that's kind of where we're starting. But in that process, they had an outside consulting network or organization come in and do a network diagnostic for kind of both schools that were coming together, to see one, where our values were aligned, and 2, like kind of where we were in terms of student data. And so the 2 biggest things that they found that prompted us to adopt a new curriculum was that, 1, our students were just not proficient on our state test. And in high school, we're not hitting the college ready benchmark at the rate that we would like them to. And also they found that most classrooms, when they actually went in, they weren't finding that students were doing the thinking in the classroom. They found instances where most of the time kids were copying things that the teacher was writing from the board. They were following processes that the teacher was sort of like guiding them through. And so they just really weren't seeing the rigor and the lift from students that they needed to see. And so we felt the biggest lever to change those things was to adopt curriculum that not only ensured that we were giving grade level tasks to students, but was also kind of supporting teachers in those instructional moves to really put more of the lift on kids.
Were there any other, like, going into this process, like other non-negotiables besides those two you just mentioned that were like, no matter what? Because like I think Shanna mentioned, nowadays, thanks to EdReports, so many publishers have like upped their game and really are producing high quality materials. So the list is vast. So there's so much to choose from. And I think that's one of the important things like going into this is like having an opinion about like, these are the things like we must see, or these are the things we absolutely do not want to see in those materials. Were there any other things, Jenny, that y'all went into this process like having as a non-negotiable?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things is our network has over 75% of our students are English language learners. And so we really wanted to make sure that whatever we adopted in math had some strong supports for MLLs. So that was one that ended up being one of our must-haves that we dug into and looked for evidence for as we were investigating kind of our, as Shanna put it, the winnowed list of programs. And then we also wanted something that was a little bit educative for teachers because, for years, especially in our high schools, we had teachers working off of kind of teacher created materials, things that had been sort of cobbled together. And so because we didn't have a centralized curriculum, it was difficult to support and provide professional learning around, several different things. And so we wanted something that would support teachers, like I said, in those instructional moves and those like new ways of teaching to the math practices. And so that's another thing that we really considered when we were looking at programs.
And what prompted you all to bring EdReports in? Like, what was that? How did that decision-making process happen?
We knew going in that one of our biggest hurdles in implementing new curriculum would be having the buy-in of teachers and leaders on campuses, and that just picking something off of a list and saying, this is what you're going to do, was just not going to cut it. We really need that investment. And so we sought out EdReports because we wanted a process that would help us involve a lot of stakeholders and honestly, that came from an organization that is really reputable, so that we could sort of, fall back on that and say, like, look, this is what EdReports guided us through, and it has their stamp of approval. And so therefore, we are going to believe that it's trustworthy, and we're only looking at green rated programs.
So Shanna, I know you mentioned you guys like part of the work that you all did with Rocky Mountain Prep was helping them like first start with that vision. Can you say a little bit more about like why that's such a critical first step in the adoption process?
Yeah. We believe that without a really clear picture of what effective teaching and learning looks like in a classroom, it's really, really hard to then select materials to help you get there, right? So regardless of where we come in with a partner, our first question is always, do you have an established vision of instruction for the content? If you do, great. Let's look at that. Let's, hone it if we need to. Let's make sure everyone is clear on what it is. So a lot of times we'll drop in with a partner and they'll have something. Metro Nashville had a really robust vision of instruction, very clear vision of instruction. But they haven't necessarily shared that with everyone. Right. I'm not saying that Nashville didn't do that. I'm saying that this is an example, right? So they've got one, everybody internally knows what it is. Coaches have been coaching around it, et cetera, but it really hasn't been shared with all stakeholders, the community, all teachers, site leaders, et cetera. Or they don't have one and hadn't really thought of one. They have maybe a vision of a graduate or a vision of a 21st century learner, but nothing really concrete around the content area of the discipline. And so our very first bit of work with folks is to make sure that they have a locally adopted, shared, understood vision of instruction, so that all things, both the, once we start looking at materials, we're checking against that, right? We're developing some must-haves or some non-negotiables. Jenny spoke to those around that vision. So if this is your vision of instruction and currently your data is saying kids are doing this, right? What your current state is. What are the things that the materials can help you do, right? They're not, certainly do not wear a cape. They are not a panacea, right? But they are a kind of low hanging fruit then to help you get to your vision, right? So what are the things that have to happen or you need or the materials must do in order to get to the vision? And then also, as we're always thinking about the end of the finish line is a great implementation where teachers are using the materials as intended, kids are learning and doing great things, right? If that is the finish line, then what are the things that need to be set up along the way to ensure that vision is realized with kids? And so as we're, when you adopt materials, it's not just the materials. You have new assessments. You might have a new walkthrough tool you need, right? You have new ways of communicating with families. Potentially you have both some hard copies and some digital copies. So now you've got to engage your tech, right? If we have it's like the hub of a wheel, right? A good vision of instruction, a solid vision of instruction is kind of the thing that brings everybody back to the decisions I'm making about curriculum instruction and implementing these materials or selecting these materials come back to that strong vision of instruction. It helps kind of make decisions easier.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. I think sometimes I'm so glad you called this out about EdReports and like the list being kind of like this like silver bullet sometimes in this process, but it's not, right? Like I think we do a lot of work in Delaware with helping them scale high quality instruction materials. And I think one of the things the state agency like emphasizes to their school systems is like our definition of high quality materials is green on EdReports. But again, that is your foundation. That is your floor, not your ceiling. And I think that's really an important message for people to receive here about this work is that every district is unique. You have unique needs. In Jenny's case, like they have a large population of multilingual learners. That may be like a different need in Nashville or here in Louisiana, And so I think you have to like have that vision be that driving force for your adoption process, because that vision should be customized and unique to the needs of your teachers and kids in your district. And always coming back to that, right? Like through the entire process, someone may love CKLA and someone may love EL, but at the end of the day, neither one of them may work for your teachers and kids. And that's the whole purpose behind this process is to like keep peeling back those layers to make sure you're making the right choice for your school system. So I appreciate you calling out that. I want to switch to Jessica real quick, but Jenny, is there anything else like about your process? Like we focused on the front end of your process and working with EdReports and like the importance of like starting with that vision, but they did work with you all throughout the entire process. And I'm just wondering if like, is there anything else like about the process that you really think is like important for the audience to hear? Like we've emphasized that vision, the importance of the vision, but is there anything else like going through this that you're like, look, if I can give you one piece of advice, this is it, going through your adoption process, what would that be?
I feel like I have a couple. One is just don't rush the process. If you have time, take the time. We definitely went through the process quicker than we would have liked, but we still did a pretty thorough job, I think. And the other is I think don't make assumptions about what your teachers already know about high quality instructional materials. We put together our committee of teachers from all of our different middle and high schools. And it was enlightening to me to just see like light bulbs go off for teachers in just the process of learning more about the shifts, learning more about the standards of mathematical practice. And this was knowledge that like, because I had it, I just sort of assumed that there was a baseline understanding of these things across my schools, and there wasn't. And so part of this process was really helpful in just like helping people understand, like, what do we understand as good, high quality math instruction? And I mean, that helped us build our vision, and it helped us build our must are must-haves / look-fors. And so just not underestimating the power of that professional learning that's part of the process.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So Jessica, I'll switch to you. So y'all's story in Nashville is a little bit different, as Shanna has alluded to, in that like when EdReports came on board, you guys already had a strong vision. So you had already started there. But can you tell us a little bit more about like your process as a like overview for the audience, and then also like the support that EdReports brought like had, provided for you all throughout that process?
Sure, thank you. So when we think about our process of adoption, we had, as previously mentioned, recently gone through an ELA adoption. So we had a process in place, but we had to think about how to shift that to make it work for mathematics, because they are different subject areas. We have slightly different priorities. Our process started with what I think is pretty extensive training for our team. we, because there is a state list, we didn't have that list when we started the process. So we started training our teachers in May, knowing that we wouldn't have a list until the end of October or November. So they couldn't even start looking at the list and winnowing that down. We had time that we could really help make sure that they understood what the vision was, what that looked like for students. It's something we'd been doing professional learning around for a number of years, but we wanted to make sure that the committee members really understood that, and also had the opportunity to become familiar with EdReports and what their reports could offer to the process as well. And so Shanna and I worked together to co-develop that arc of learning for the committee members. I think it's important to note in our district, math leaders and coaches are not allowed to be part of the selection process. As far as making the actual choice, that is only in the hands of teachers. So my work and the work of our math coaches in the district was really to support the learning of the people who would make the decision, because all of that power was in the hands of our teachers. So we spent a lot of time really digging into the materials and EdReports, what that could tell us, and how it aligned with our vision in MNPS.
That's great. I didn't ask you this on the front end, so our audience maybe just be curious about like what materials y'all did end up ultimately adopting. So can both of y'all just share that real quick? Jessica, I'll start with you.
Sure. So for K-5, we adopted Accelerate Learning's STEM Scopes materials for math. And then for 6th through high school, we adopted the Open Up materials.
Jenny?
And we already had Bridges adopted at the elementary level. And we ended up choosing mid-school math for 6-8, and then the Open Up materials for high school.
Okay, great.
Annie, I want to say, I just want to add here, part of the work that was so important with Rocky Mountain Prep is they already had Bridges in the K-5. So with Jenny's team, we did a lot of like, let's understand what are the great aspects of Bridges that we would want to, we want a seamless transition for kiddos, right?
Yeah.
Leaving 5th grade and coming to 6th grade. So their team did a great job of like really digging into Bridges and seeing the reading the reports and seeing the highlights of Bridges, so that whatever they chose in middle school had a direct correlation and would be an easy, smooth transition of learning. And we actually had that same conversation, Jessica, with your team around coherence. What does it mean to be coherent, not just in the math, the instructional shifts around coherence, but like instructionally coherent. and where you would need to really investigate at those grade breaks to make sure that the materials spoke well to one another, so that it became an easy transition for kids, and also a great way to kind of ground vertical teaming and mathematical discussions K-12.
Thanks, Shana. I think that's really helpful. I think often we notice how surprised I think some school systems, as they are like first venturing into this, they're like, oh, there's like a K-12 ELA curricula is not a thing, right? And so I think it's like comes as a surprise to people, and that you do, sometimes you'll be with like one publisher for one product in K-5, another potentially for 6-8, and then for high school, and having some cohesion across those products, especially when they come from different publishers, I think is so important. So I really do appreciate you sharing that. And Jessica and Jenny, if there's anything like you all want to add on to what Shanna just said about that, feel free here too. About like, how did you go about it? Like ensuring either looking for some of that cohesion and continuity on the front end or on the back end, like helping your teachers and like school leaders understand those connections.
I think that was one of the real drivers through our whole process. One of the earliest conversations that we had with the review committee was around coherence for students, and really thinking about a difference that it makes if students are using materials from the same publisher, materials that have the same sort of instructional vision built into them or support that. And as we went through the process, it's really easy to let feelings come into it. I really like this. I know you said that earlier, Annie, like, I like this product, right? So we used that discussion of coherence to root people back and say, I know you may love that. It may look colorful. It may look exciting, right? But what's best for our students? And early in the process, they came to the decision that as coherent a process, or a set of adopted materials as possible, that's what they wanted to do. So they said, at most, we're going with 2 publishers. We had the option to actually adopt K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and high school separately. And they said, we don't want to do that. We think that that would be difficult for our students. And so they came to a decision early on and said, we are at most 2. And so as they went through the process, we would come back to that when a group would say, but I really like this. Okay, if you really like that, you have to talk to other people, right? Look at their scores, look at how it supports their students, and help make a decision that is going to be a good decision for students in the long run, not just for your specific grade or for your little grade band.
And Jenny, I'll let you chime in here in a second too, but one of the things that you just made me think about, Jessica, is not only is the transition easier for students and better for their learning trajectory, but if I'm a large district, I'm working with a district right now in California, very large district, a K-12 adoption, including advanced courses, that's a lot of professional learning. That's a lot of organizing at the system level. That's a lot of lift. If you've got a K2, a 3-5, a 6-8, a high school set, if you're integrated 1, 2, 3, and then you have an advanced course, set, like, we want to be able to help teachers use these materials. And that's going to require, for lots of teachers, a kind of shift away from potentially being the person who was cobbling together resources. And as a former professional learning person, it's a lot easier for me and a lot more coherent around like what I'm sending out and the kinds of professional learning I'm doing and the communities of practice I'm running. If we're not all over the place with one publisher here, one publisher there, this publisher has this kind of philosophy around teaching, this publisher has this kind of philosophy or this structure around lesson planning, there are a lot of benefits to really thinking about that instructional coherence.
Yeah, and I'll add that we also had conversations a lot about that of like we want what it looks like to do math in elementary, middle, and high school to be the same for students, even though we are working with different publishers. And so we talked a lot about, you know, what does discussion look like between students in these different curriculum? What does the lesson structure look like? And the whole like learning cycle in each curriculum. And I think something else important to just bring up here is that we learned also a lot about just because they have the same publisher doesn't mean that they have the same author. And so a lot of times, even within one publisher, you've got slightly different looking materials because the authors are different. And so that was something we didn't know going in, or that things like illustrative math authors show up in several different publishers. And so that was just an interesting learning process of kind of how products are set up and organized.
Yeah, and I think y'all are just again like emphasizing you can't rush this, right? There are so many considerations that have to be made. And so I think that leads me to my last question, because I do want to open it up to the audience, but it's a question for both Jenny and Jessica of like, what is like the biggest value of having a partner like EdReports come in and help you navigate all these considerations, right? Like, what would you like, you know, if you had to like make that case of like, you really do need to bring in an outside expert to those joining us today, like, what would you say to that?
So I think there's tons of benefits. One being that Shanna helped us really understand that the way she put it, not all greens are the same. And that we have this big list of all green rated curriculum, and like, what does that really mean when you dig into the report and how to see those differences? And I think also it just gives the process, at least for our team, more credibility, right? To say like, Jenny is not steering this process. Like, people can't come back and say like, oh, well, Jenny, you know, picked these materials, and so that's why we're doing them. And it helped us just stay really unbiased and say like, this is the protocol that we're following. This is the evidence that we're collecting. And it's no one person's like favorite. It's just what the evidence is telling us is the best product for our students.
I agree with that. It did add credibility to the process. I think also for us, it really helped us focus. There were things when we went through the process, I said, well, then we're going to do scoring. And so Shannon would say, okay, but what does that actually look like? What does the scoring process look like? What are they actually doing during that time? And how are you going to capture that? How will you then use that to make a decision? Is it just a top score? Is there a consensus discussion? How do you go about that? So really thinking through some of the details that maybe we hadn't considered to stay true to the priorities that we had set, and really thinking about that the whole way through.
Great. Awesome. Okay. Well, I want to give time for our audience today to ask some like burning questions. And so let me get in our Q&A. So Mariana has a question of like, so when you have teachers who are accustomed to cobbling together their materials, and you probably really have enjoyed that creative process, that is not the case for all, but some do, right? How do you, like in your daily practice and as a follow-up to the adoption process, encourage and support teachers to like making full use of that curriculum and like, I guess like to give it a shot, right? Like if they do feel like some of their creativity has been taken from them in this process, like how do you build that like investment in these new materials with them? And either one of y'all anybody can take it.
We have tried to frame it as a shift in how they spend their time. And I think some of that came from some of the reading that we actually did during the professional learning. But really thinking about, you're spending a lot of time working to make the best experience for your students, but so much time was spent in searching and finding that actually being responsive and thinking about how to meet the needs of your individual students, you didn't have as much time for that. So now that you have high quality instructional materials that are there for you to use, you can spend more time thinking about, what is the mathematical intent of this lesson? How will I know if my students are learning it? What am I looking for, listening for? And what supports do they need to give them access? So they could shift their attention to their students, really, and meeting their needs.
We similarly talked a lot about that shift in what teachers should be spending the bulk of their time on, and shifting it to lesson internalization instead of creation of materials. And I would say, additionally, we spent a lot of time creating that vision and then sending it out for feedback, and then creating the vision, like editing the vision, sending it back for feedback. So a lot of people felt like they had a voice in creating the mathematical vision. And then when we look at like these new materials versus things that we're putting together on our own, we can have that discussion of what is actually going to help us get closer to this instructional vision that we want to be true for students. So I think that was really helpful. And then also kind of that balance of investment and accountability. Like it is part of our walkthrough tools now. It's part of our kind of like school success framework that like 100% of classrooms will be using the adopted curriculum, and it's just a non-negotiable. So it's kind of the both and there.
Yeah, I think Jessica, you said this, it's about a shift. It's a mindset shift, right? Of shifting your focus from being a curriculum writer to a master teacher, right? And I think that's like, if you had to ask teachers, probably most of them are going to say they prefer the latter, right? Like many curriculum writers were former teachers, but most teachers are not curriculum writers. That is just like, that's a different skill set, and that's okay. And so I think by like handing these teachers these materials, you are not taking away their creativity. You are freeing up their time to then use that creativity in a much more meaningful way, which is like bringing those lessons to life for their kids, meeting their kids' individual and unique needs by using the embedded supports in these amazing materials. So it's just like, it's a different shift. And I think one that like if you do take the time to help these teachers like understand in that initial launch training, like the why behind these materials, and how to use them effectively, they are going to appreciate that shift rather than resent it. So yeah, yep. I think sorry, I always have my questions, but I'm like, let me just double check the Q&A real quick. So I think, a question we get often is like the role of like who's participating in this process. And so would love to know again from both of you all, like who was at the table for your selection process?
Oh, go ahead, Jenny. I'll let you start.
We opened up committee applications to everyone in the network, and then ended up selecting just based on kind of years of experience. We wanted also different perspectives, like people who were special educators, people who were specialists in multi-language learners. We wanted to make sure that we had like the content knowledge, varying years of experience, and then those different kind of lenses based on our look-fors and our vision.
For us, we also had an application that was open to any teacher in our district. We had to balance considering a number of different factors because our state only allows for math teachers to be part of the math adoption process. So we weren't allowed to have special educators because they were not considered to be math teachers. And so we looked for people who had dual endorsements that might be special educators and math teachers, but currently serving as math teachers, or they also had an EL endorsement because we also have a high number of multilingual learners in the district. And we balanced by part of town. In Nashville, our areas of town are very different. And so we wanted to make sure that we had representation from all parts of town that were balanced, a balance of years of experience, and also specialty schools. We have a number of different magnet schools, some that are arts magnets, some that are academic magnets, and some other. We also have priority schools that are in the lowest 10% of the district. So, or I'm sorry, of the state. So we wanted to have representation from all of our special types of schools to make sure that the materials would meet the needs of people around the district. The other thing, because only teachers were on that committee, we also had an advisory council that met throughout the process that would help inform. And that committee, we had principals, principal supervisors, we had members from our learning technology department, our English learner department, our special education department. They helped develop the rubric. They helped develop the questions that we used to select committee members. They went through the process of how should the rubric be weighted and that sort of thing. So they couldn't actually do the scoring themselves, but we wanted to make sure that they were speaking into the process because they had expertise that and perspectives that were different than those of the teachers who were on the selection and review committee.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think it's just so vital to the long-term both investment of and success of your materials that like as many voices are at the table, because the reality is these materials are going to impact everyone in the district. And so like it's just so I think so important to make sure that like there's like equal voice representation as part of that selection process so that everyone like sees themselves, sees their kids in that choice. So thank you for that. And I think that's a great way, like a great last question for us to leave on today. I'm gonna go and share my screen again real quick. And if there's any final questions, go ahead and drop them in for either the chat or the Q&A. But I appreciate everyone's time today. What we have also dropped into the chat today is our blog. So I think today we touched on some of the steps in the process. And so the blog that we just released last week outlines those steps. And some of those, like, if you only make sure you do 4 things in the adoption process, these are those 4 things. And we touched on those here today. Things like don't rush the process, make sure that the review committee has the professional learning they need to do an effective review of materials. So things like that. So check out the blog that's in the chat. Here's some other resources that you all can provide from us at Rivet Education that could be helpful to you all in this process. Again, our framework is linked here that has additional details about each the characteristics, types, and structures of curriculum-based professional learning, looking like specifically at adoption. The Professional Learning Partner Guide is here. Again, this is a free resource. So if you are about to embark on the adoption process and want help from an organization like EdReports, you can go to the Professional Learning Partner Guide and filter by adoption. And you can filter by content specific adoption. So you can look and see which providers have been certified by Rivet for ELA adoptions. math adoptions and science adoptions. And then you can filter by your state to make sure they are willing and able to serve your state. There's great lists. There's many providers out there that can help you. And then also like we have a guidebook that can help you just like navigate this process of selecting the right partner. So our guidebook has interview questions that you can ask depending on the type of professional learning you're seeking to procure in those initial like contact interviews and calls with providers. So just some specific questions to help you narrow your choice. There's some steps in here again, like selecting the right partner. And then after you've selected, like how to manage a partner and that partnership and manage, even more importantly, multiple partners. So quick resources there for you all today. And then as a reminder, again, we are just kicking off this series. So the series is twofold. We will release first the blog, as we did last week. That really, the blogs are more about like taking each stage of the process and identifying like the right steps. So what are the steps that like district leaders, school leaders, and teachers should be taking in this particular stage of the implementation journey? And then our PL Power Hours are the third Thursday of every month. And again, they take that like best practices and put them into action by like sharing real stories from actual school systems that have been in this like part of the journey themselves. And so go ahead, you can register on our website for all of the next webinars in this series, and then be on the lookout for our blogs. And then if you have any questions, go ahead and like contact us, feel free. But again, it was just such a pleasure to be able to share these stories with you all today. Shanna, Jessica, Jenny, thank you all so much for being here today. And we will be sharing both a copy of today's like slides, even though we didn't go through a whole lot of slides here, but we'll share a copy of that deck. And more importantly, we'll share a copy of this recording with everyone that was here today so that you all can have this, share it with your team. And let's see. Oh, okay. Sorry, I got someone on my team raising their hand. So I'm going to let Jennifer real quick. Jennifer, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I must have misclicked something. I do not actually have... Thank you so much.
Yeah, our director of product, ladies and gentlemen. No worries. Again, so thank you everyone so much for being here today. And we look forward to seeing you all in October, where we are going to dig into the initial launch of your new curriculum. Everybody take care and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Annie and Jessica and Jenny. It was great to see you.
You too.
Thank you.
Let's catch up.